Hi, I'm Martha Lane Fox, longtime friend of Founders Forum, thrilled to be at HealthTech Summit this afternoon and really excited to have this conversation because I'm not an expert, but I'm very much hoping to learn. The themes of health, sustainability, what we've just faced in the last year are ones that I think we all have an interest in right now. I've been chairing the House of Lords Select Committee on the long-term implications of COVID and trying to unpick what those implications are, the interlinks between the climate crisis, the economic crisis we're going to face, and the pandemic that we've been through is complicated. So I'm thrilled to be joined by somebody that's going to be able to help us do that more effectively than I would be able to. I'm going to ask Steve from Roche, to introduce himself, and then we're going to have about a 20-minute conversation. So Steve, welcome from Bedford.
Thanks, Martha. Good to meet you as well, and good to meet everybody. Steve Allen. I'm the global head of our clinical operations informatics teams, looking at our late stage clinical trials in Roche, and also have been leading our pandemic response teams in the UK pharma business over the last 18 months. So yes, the worlds that we've had around climate change and our massive change of COVID have been at the center of our world for some time now.
Well, I think that you probably have had one of the busier jobs on the planet right now. It feels as though it's been divided. You know, other people have had a time of furlough at home and been kicking about, or people have had this insanely busy time, and I think you probably fall into that category. Steve, just explain what you do at Roche, because I think that'll be really interesting for people. When you say you lead the clinical response in the trials and you've led the response over the last year, can you give us an example of what that means and the work you've been doing?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'll start with our clinical trials area. So for those not familiar with how clinical trials are operating, we have clinical trials kind of go from very early stage, where we're looking at early on in the research of bringing new treatments into our healthcare system, right through to what we call our late stage environment, so phase 2A to phase 3 trials. And these are the very large clinical trials that are run to ensure that any new innovative medicines that come into the healthcare system is obviously safe, they're effective, they meet kind of the scientific endpoints that have been delivered. And some of these trials involve thousands and thousands of people across the globe. So our role in partnering with lots of people, the big team in Roche, to kind of deliver all of that is to look at how we use technology and data to enable that, both from a patient perspective, from our partners in our clinical trial sites, the teams that run the clinical trials on behalf of us as sponsors, and then also our colleagues within Roche, across all our teams within Roche. So that's kind of the clinical trial side. Mm-hmm. And then the other role was around essentially how do we respond to the global pandemic? How do we maintain our patient safety? That's at the forefront of our mind as we went through any incident. How do we kind of manage our reputation? How do we kind of make sure that we're doing the right thing? How do we kind of really make sure we have our colleague safety at the front of our minds as well? And how do we ensure constant drug supply through that? So there's kind of, it really encapsulates the whole end-to-end running of a business within an incident that is kind of putting stresses and strains on the organization in many different fronts. And that's obviously within the UK, but also a part of a very global, big organization. So how we work with lots of partners, both internally and also externally.
And we'll just come back to the kind of sustainability elements of all of that in a minute, but I'm sure people will be really interested to hear about some of those points in the chain over the last year. So when you say, ensure the drug supply kind of casually, that's the kind of fundamental building block of infrastructure for us as a society. So can you just give us a bit of detail about both how kind of technology enabled you to keep going over the last year, perhaps, or some of the challenges within that? I've been thinking a lot about how Amazon has become a kind of public service for many people over the last year. And actually, that kind of makes me feel uncomfortable, but kind of thank God in many ways, and thank God that I've been lucky enough to use that service. But it's the same for drugs companies. There's such a fundamental underpinning for all of us. Can you talk a little bit about how you managed that through and made sure there was that drug supply for people?
I guess at the heart, the heart of it is around our people. So people make things work, and so we had to almost say overnight shift the ways that we look at how we work together. to manage our business. So I can't remember our stats or something. Our virtual meetings kind of went up like 3,000%. Well, you have to have an infrastructure in place which can cope with that. So, very much having our flexible cloud-based infrastructure, which enables that to happen, so that we can just shift relatively seamlessly. Things like our security, how do we enable kind of access to systems in a way that is possible from multiple locations? So those are some of the real practical things that we have to deal with at a global level and also at a local level. And then rethinking, how do we operate? How do we kind of, we're used to working together, collaborating together locally. How do we do that now? How do we kind of help people do that? How do we kind of move people away from our offices into their homes? How do we enable them to be as comfortable as possible? That's a challenge. How just practically have the right equipment to be able to do the work. So some very practical things that kind of kick in. And then, how do we our supply chain teams connecting with their partners, managing our forecasting. Imagine the forecasting of different medicines is completely, some are sky high, some are going to low down. So managing that information and having technology to enable those, so that our manufacturing facilities can ramp up, having our supply chains to enable that, seeing where we may have, do we have issues? Do we have issues with supply in a particular area in as real time as possible a way as we can? So those are some of the, from a technology perspective, some of those things that really have to kind of, change. We do that, but it's like putting it on steroids almost, very, very, very quickly.
And how do you see the kind of fundamentals of sustainability around all of that? I mean, you were on a very clear path to becoming a very sustainable company before all of this. These trends have accelerated, presumably. And how do you think about that when you talk about all of the processes in the supply chain that you've just described to us?
Yeah, so I kind of take it in a few parts. One is around starting to think then, so what are our supply chain? And we put during the pandemic response, we've clearly been trying to make sure some very specific things happen because you're in this very incident mode. But we started to learn more around how we do that. So from a sustainability, from an environmental sustainability perspective, we've got one, how do we make our business, our environments, a great place to work, but how do we do that in a sustainable way? So there's ways we've done that. We obviously have our solar panel. We're completely 100% reliant on wind powered. Our supplies is wind powered. We purchase wind powered renewable energy from our suppliers. We've recently done a partnership with E.ON. So there's the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, if people are familiar with that. And, scope 1 is more easy, you're in control of that. Scope 2 is a bit more difficult, and scope 3 is really hard. So we're focused on scope 2 in terms of how do we have a good understanding of all our supply chain? How do we help people in partnership sort of get advantage of what we can do with climate, how we purchase our climate power, and then can we also help others who are part of our supply chain kind of gain advantage from that? And then finally looking at how do we then kind of take the full end-to-end supply chain, and so data is playing a big part in that. We're partnering with Manufacture 2030 as a way of understanding kind of then how do we understand our supply chains. How do we use data to be able to kind of visualize that and see where we are towards our targets as we look out kind of in 2030, 2040, where we're moving towards? So those are some of the things that we're doing then as a business within our just general ways of working as a sustainable business going forward.
And when that's a huge amount of change over, I mean, I know it doesn't happen overnight and these are all incremental changes, but when you think about that process, what are the points of failure in your mind? What makes you anxious? Where are the things that you think, oh, crumps, that's going to be the biggest challenge in the landscape?
I mean, you can't do this alone. Yeah, so I think that's probably the biggest challenge is you as an organization, we have an impact, but we can't have the big impact. I mean, the healthcare industry, go macro and look at healthcare industry, academia, the healthcare industry, National Health Service, etc. but take that globally, it accounts for around 4.5% of global emissions. So it's a big contributor to the climate challenge we have. Every component part of that whole ecosystem has to play a role in it. So I think that's the biggest challenge, is having those ecosystems that are joined up and working together around that. One component part can have a small part to play, and we can all do a small part to play. But to make kind of systemic change, we've all got to kind of work together and do that. So I think that's the real challenge. And healthcare also can be sometimes, we've seen it can be slow to adapt and adopt new ways of working, new technologies. It can be slow, and COVID's a great example of being an accelerator. We're embedded in that environment, so that environment has to change, it has to accelerate, it has to accept innovation. Some of that might need funding, might need different investment to be able to do that. There's big infrastructure investments that are then needed to kind of move where we are today into a new environment, and how we move towards 2030. So that long-term thinking has to be in place now to reap the rewards later.
And you mentioned innovation a few times in that, which makes complete sense, of course. What are the exciting innovations that you've seen or are working on that you can share with us? And when you think about 2030, what are some things that you think, okay, that is really going to feel quite substantially different in our business or for the end user?
Yeah, so what if I kind of take the world that I work closely in and around running clinical trials, changing the way, reimagining the way that we can enable access and reduce the burden on patients that are going through clinical trials is a real goal of ours. And that sort of has a win-win-win for the patient. It has a win for all the collaborators that are involved in running the trial, and actually then that has a win on the environment. I'll give you an example of that. One of one of our key trends that we're working to, and COVID has probably accelerated some of this, is what we call decentralized trials, or hybrid trials in actual fact. So when a patient is on a clinical trial, they will very often have to go and visit a research center, a research clinic that's running the trial. That could mean, long distance travel, not just for them, but for their carers as well. So there's a high burden on the patient. So we think about patient choice. Is what if you could have some of those assessments, some of those tests, how we would kind of maintain a good interaction between the patient and their caregiver and their clinicians on a remote basis. So remote technologies, we talk about telemedicine, telehealth, but applying that so that we're actually reducing the burden on the patients. People have mobility issues, the affordability of travel, all of those elements come into play. How could we enable bringing that care into or as close to a patient's home, or could they go and do that at a local clinic rather than having to do that at a research clinic, which may be many miles away? That increases access to the patient. So if we take that into more of a global setting, we can, how do we enable countries that don't have that infrastructure? How do we do that? So those are the we're really kind of excited about how do we run these remote clinical trials? How do we decentralize the way we operate? But that's quite ingrained in the way we work. That's sites that run clinical trials have good infrastructure to do that. Other areas, they don't have the infrastructure to do that. So that's a thing. We're seeing COVID. A lot of trials had to stop. Some trials then had to adapt very quickly to being able to continue. So this is an area where I think we're really on an interesting path to kind of looking at how we can leverage technology more and more to enable that patient choice. Because remember, some patients actually want to go to a place, they want to have a social interaction, or they feel more comfortable. They feel more. They feel more comfortable doing that. Yeah. So we want to enable that patient choice. By doing that, I think we can have a significant impact on the environmentally. We have a significant impact in terms of being able to bring that choice back into the individual and being able to provide more care at home. And we see that also, I think, in beyond the clinical trial setting. There's a lot of examples that we've gone through the pandemic of more and more remote interactions, bringing that care into homes, but also then being able to do that on a basis. If I need to go to an institution, then I can go there as well. And I think technology just has a significant part to play in all of that.
And underpinning a lot of this, I would imagine, in Roche's business is the need for high quality, pretty cutting edge technical skills, far be it for me to describe the systems and platforms you need, but presumably blockchain technology will have quite a significant impact on how you think about trials in the future, potentially. Machine learning must be heavily deployed already. Are you finding that there's a changing nature to the workforce you need, and has that been a challenge, or have you found that something that's been easy to adapt to?
We have some incredibly talented colleagues at Roche, as do many other of our companies within the industry. I think it's fair to say across most areas of our business, you'll see in our goals in terms of talent development, we need to be able to adapt with more kind of advanced analytics capabilities. In our informatics organization, that's been something we've been on a path now over a number of years, is how do we shift some of our profiles of people coming into the organization? How do we do that at early careers? So that's one thing we're really proud of here in the UK, is actually kind of looking at bringing in apprenticeships, placement students, early career opportunities in areas like data science. We've had some real successes over the last couple of years of bringing in early talent in those areas, which probably 5 years ago we wouldn't have thought of bringing early talent into those areas. So all parts of our organization are looking at how do we leverage, how do we automate, how do we use advanced analytics capabilities. And yes, we're putting a lot of investment into those. Roche is a pretty big player in the market around kind of looking at data as a core part of our business. How do we bring insights through genomics? A lot of work going on in genomics, a lot of work going on in clinical science areas. So it's kind of becoming almost integrated into our business. So access to that talent in places like the UK, in places in the US, over in Asia Pacific, we're always on the hunt for great talent with those skills coming into the organization, because it is only going to increase the need for that, to remove inefficiencies from our organization, but also to gain great insights into what is a very complex area of. We talk about data, we don't want to simplify it. It's a significantly complex area for us all to partner with academia and research institutions.
Yeah, it was interesting you mentioned partnership, but presumably, as you say, healthcare contributing to nearly 4% of global emissions. You must be looking a lot at other industries as well, and how to partner across industries, share learnings and data. Does Roche actively involved with other partnerships to look at other sectors and how they're addressing sustainability and addressing the challenges that we face?
Yeah, I think we're more and more kind of what can we learn from other industries in terms of the way we work. Recently, we've had a partnership agreement with the Turing Institute, for example, in the UK. So I think that's our view as well, is we can't do this together. I mean, clinical trials, for example, they'll generate maybe 4 or 5% of clinical data available. So most data, when we talk about real world data, sit outside the Roche walls. So we have to partner with lots of in other institutions to do that. And I think we're now bringing in, as we do that, is starting to think about and then, well, what's the considerations from an environmental perspective? How do we build that into our procurement approach, our procurement services? When we do partner, is how do we kind of put that what's the environmental footprint for people that we want to work with? So now it's a real consideration of, as we partner, is again that collective ownership of the environmental impact. How do we build that into our normal way of working? Really consider how and who we partner with, and what they're doing as well to kind of drive down that whole footprint.
And presumably, Founders Forum is all about startups. You must be constantly looking to see what's happening in the world of startups and engaging with much smaller and more innovative not necessarily more innovative, no disrespect with Roche, but companies with that kind of intense laser focus of a startup world.
Yeah, that's increased significantly over the last few years. I mean, the space is becoming increasingly crowded, with startups, with innovative companies coming in, seeing these needs, they go faster than some of the large tech companies and go faster than than us as a large organization. And I think as we go forward, we'll see that the strengths of our organization, of an organization like Roche, is in our deep scientific understanding. We understand that kind of thing. We bring that deep scientific knowledge, disease area knowledge. We bring good understanding of the environment that we work in, the regulatory environments, and then kind of couple that with innovative technology startups or companies to kind of blend that together, because it isn't an easy place for us to enter. But we can.
You heard it here, Founders Forum. Founders Forum, you heard it here. Roche want to hear from you. That's what I heard in that answer. And we've only got a couple of minutes left, Stephen. I really thank you for your time, but I want to end asking whether or not you feel optimistic. I mean, you are at the nexus of so many interesting areas that have affected our world, perhaps have become more seen than people ever had imagined over the last year. All of us have got to focus on 2030, 2040 and beyond. Do you feel optimistic about how we're going to be able to adapt or innovate our way through to some kind of sustainable future?
Genuinely, yes, I do. I feel optimistic. My kids are very optimistic. They're very aware. They're very tuned in. So at the micro level of my family, I'm very optimistic about the future that and how they see the future. And then at the kind of macro level, the kind of things that we're doing as an embedded partner within our industry, I feel really, I'm genuinely really excited about the difference we can make. Both, again, this triple win, a win for our patients and their experience that they have, and getting access to great treatments. Win for our colleagues in terms of the way that they work and our industry as a whole. And then that all has it can have such a positive impact on the environment that we work in. And as long as we keep it in the forefront of our minds, I think we've got to work hard at it. It's not easy. But I think over the coming 10, 15 years, we really have a great opportunity to kind of embrace the challenges that we've got and use innovation and technology to help us get there. It's not going to be the only way, but really embrace it. So organizations across, this is a call for us to it's a collective call to action for us all.
Well, that's a great note to end on, and I think thank you for all of us for keeping the drug supplies running. We wish you much success over the next decade. Look forward to catching up, to seeing how we're getting on in another 10 years. Thank you, Steve. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.